Mike, for those of you the people watching who aren't familiar with you, just talk about your role at Wake Forest. Talk about like how long you've been there and what your day-to-day looks like.
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Player Development and the Pitching Lab Coordinator. So everything that happens from a data point of view, from a biomechanics point of view, I'm using that information to help our staff kind of design and piece together our pitchers so that we win more games and use guys the right way and try and keep them healthy as best as possible.
So what's that dynamic look like with Corey, with the pitching coach, as far as like, he's the pitching coach, but then you're also very heavily involved in the development of these pitchers. How does that dynamic work? How do you guys collaborate? How do you know kind of who takes the lead on which thing?
It's very yin and yang. I think when I started, he came from Maryland and said, hey, we have a pitching lab role kind of open, and we think there's a lot that you could do with that. When we were going through that initial idea, the way that we jived in philosophy, and we realized that we had a very similar philosophy to start with. So that helped quite a bit because it's much easier to see eye to eye on certain things from a general philosophy point of view. But then when we started working together, we realized that we came to a very similar philosophy from very different angles a lot of the time, and that actually works really, really well. Right? So like one example is, I say this a lot to our guys, like he has the dad energy and I have the big brother energy, and sometimes that flip-flops depending on what's happening, but that balance is, I think, really healthy for not only for our guys, but for him and I too.
I think it just generally speaking, whether it's in baseball development or like running a company, like you kind of need someone who can be the enforcer, accountability, and then someone who can more relate directly on their level, and like they can kind of confide in, and you can be more like that confidant type. So I think it's important to have both. Wake Forest has had the pitching lab for a while now, correct? Like it's been what, 7-8 years at least.
2018, I think, was the first year.
So what do you think is one of the main reasons for kind of this more recent turnaround, right? Like a lot of people assume you get all the fancy toys, you get the lab, you get the force plates, you get the slow motion video, and like instantly guys just get better. But it hasn't necessarily been. It's been more recent. So how do you think through utilizing that data? Why has there been such a sudden shift in the past 2-3 years, especially since you joined the program? I mean, we can read through some of the before and afters, but I mean, this past year, first in ERA, first in FIP, first in WHIP, first in K to walk, first in Ks per nine, first in whiff percentage, chase percentage, opposing batting average, OPS, WOBA. I mean, it's just the staff ERA has gone from 5.53 to 2.72. Average fastball velocity is up almost 2 miles an hour. Like we can just keep going down the list. But yeah, how do you think through like why weren't these improvements maybe so immediate when the lab was first brought on, and how do you think through that?
Yeah, well, obviously I can't speak to what was happening before Corey and I got here, but our own journey when we started was we felt there was so much information, and it wasn't about taking in more information. It was how do we utilize what we currently have. Like I think that's where we found the utilization of our data team was so important. So we have a 20-person student-driven data analytics team. They're rock stars. They operate, I think, as close to a big league organization as you can operate, and they're fully collaborative, and they're builders. And Chris Lewis, who was a student manager at the time of that team, became the director of that team the last couple of years. He spent a lot of time with Corey and I and with the rest of the coaching staff, and he transformed everything. And there are a lot of other people too. I mean, Nihar Mascara, who's now with the Twins, and Lauren McGovern was a part of that leadership group too. But a bunch of students who just said, we're gonna build information to be housed appropriately so that these guys can find the answers to things that they need and apply it as well as possible. That really worked, and I think it ended up creating an environment where it's data driven, and guys know that they can soak in information just by existing in that space. Like it's all available to them. And we're trying to translate it into a language instead of more numbers based and numerical. We're trying to get them to understand, like, this is what's describing is happening in the game, and this is how you use this to your advantage.
How have you found the receptiveness of your players to this information? Because a lot of teams, like we train hundreds of pros, and it varies organization to organization, but a lot of organizations won't show the players their data. It's like guy throws, they come to us and they're like, what were my numbers? And we're like, you don't know your numbers. Like, no, they won't show me. They won't show me my video. They won't. So there's like a fear of like, and in some cases this is probably a warranted fear of like not giving guys too much information. They can get domed up, certain personality types for sure. But you guys seem to very much want to empower your players, know your information, know your data, know your strengths, be willing to, know what the video means, know what the data means. Is everyone seemingly receptive to that? Do guys like take pride in learning that information, or are some guys more kind of closed off to it? How do you think through like sharing the data side of it, and how have players taken that?
Yeah, they've taken it in full stride. I mean, they crave it. Like it's not a question whether they want it or not. Like they come in looking for that, which can be part of the problem too. Every once in a while, where a guy's like, hey, like we just need to, hey, you got to back off. Just go pitch. Like just forget about your numbers for a minute and just go pitch and utilize the things that we're teaching you. But I think they're hungry for it, and especially the guys that we get from Pro Ball too are coming in hungry for information. I do like the way that some players are coming in saying that their orgs are doing it. Like Rhett Lauder, it was hanging around the last couple of days. He's back in town. It was awesome to see him. But it's interesting. Like he used so much information. He's a master at it, and he really took the infrastructure that we set up for him to receive and use information, and mastered it. I mean, he would like dissect every hitter that we were going to face with our pitching coach, along with all of his own information, the right way. And so it's interesting to see, like, when he gets into Pro Ball, like, how is his org going to jive with that, right? And he's coming in saying, like, the Reds are awesome. Like, they have everything available. They have a ton of information, but they don't necessarily throw it on you. They allow you to go at your own pace and kind of eat from the buffet, in a sense. I thought that was a really smart way to approach it. So I like to think we're similar. I think with when the kids are younger, especially in college ball, because it's so systematic to how you play the game, that's got to be the most important piece, that they need to learn a lot of those fundamentals first, right? So like dealing with a pitch clock, for one, is really hard. Understanding all this new information, like that's just being thrown your direction, is like a lot to swallow, in addition to you just being a college student for the first time and trying to figure out who you are. And so I think the environment that you have set up needs to be conducive to the game that you're trying to play and the level that they're at, and just having feel with what to give them, when to give it to them, and how to do so.
I think a lot of what you said kind of jives with our experience. Like we talk a lot about like how do we take all this information and simplify it down to where it doesn't overload them, right? Like, Corey might have 50 graphs on the back end after doing a mocap, but it's like, we know we can't just dump that on them, or you can, but like you're not going to get very much usefulness out of that. It's like, how do we take that? And maybe this is a question for you. Like, how do you take that and distill it down to the 3, 4, 5 bullet points that can actually lead to an actionable change? How do you have that conversation with their pitching coach so that can turn into an actual outcome?
I can speak on it first. I think honestly, some of it depends on the athlete, just knowing, hey, how kind of educated are they on how they, I don't know, move or how they throw, or what makes them good, or do they really not want to focus on that? Do they want to just kind of know, hey, here's what I need to do, not really kind of focus on the every little piece, just, hey, give me the stuff to do that should help with this, and I'll just kind of go do it. But some guys, you'll definitely see, hey, I need to know the why behind it to actually like buy into doing it. And I think I was one of those guys in college where I might get something from a pitching coach or a coach here or there, and be like, well, for me to really buy into doing that every day or very often, like I need to know why, or else I'm just not going to do it. And then but you'll definitely see guys that, hey, I'm going to trust you with this. You know more than me on it. Just tell me what to do, and I'm going to go get after it. I don't know. Would you say something similar to that, or?
I think we have almost the same experience. The only difference I would say is I think a lot of the kids that we get, when they come in, like they don't know exactly what they're looking for. So we have to hand feed them the right things, and it becomes a very selective process by us, which makes it easier, I think. But I think we're looking to build a foundation, and like I said, to use it as a language. Like I want you to use it to help you understand what's happening in the game, and what you can use to your own advantage, and what you might be able to look for to make an adjustment. So you're getting proper feedback all the time, rather than just like shoving things that are going to make them better all the time down their throats.
I have one more.
Yeah,
I think also that goes along with that is you kind of have to look at the whole picture too. Like if you look at someone's mocap report in isolation versus knowing what actually makes them a good pitcher or successful or whatever, you can make suggestions based on only looking at one thing. But I think in reality, you need to know, what limitations or what things does that player do that really makes them special or good, and not compromise kind of those things by just only looking at one other piece. So
could not agree
Yeah,
more.
and that goes with motion capture. That goes with just general like pitching coach.
Yep.
With should we be adding a pitch? Should we be changing the arsenal? Like, if you can understand truly the entire bird's eye view picture of where this player's strengths, what are his weaknesses, what makes him good, where is he an outlier, then we can almost like we can shift the development plan towards making him more of an outlier. Right? It's not necessarily about being like this well-rounded player who like you just have average everything. It's like you maybe have a bad changeup, like an elite fastball. Like, should our focus just be on getting you to have like an average changeup, or should it be on making your already great fastball completely elite? Right? Like, so I think the game has started to shift towards recognizing like the best players in the world have some sort of outlier quality, whether it's outlier velo, outlier VAA, crazy extension, crazy release height, crazy spin rate on a slider.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to become an outlier. It's not like, okay, maybe one guy isn't going to be able to throw a sweeper because he doesn't have that supination bias. He just really struggles to do it. That's okay. Like, how many big league all-stars are there that don't have sweepers? A lot. Like, figure out the profile that fits for you. You might not be the tall, Justin Verlander, high release height,
Yeah.
high backspin, high vertical break, four seam, curveball, gyro slide. Like, that might not be your profile. But there's so many different profiles out there. That's the beauty of pitching. There's not like one way to do it.
Yeah.
So figuring out like your own unique path, how can I be different from the next guy?
I'm a huge believer in everybody has their own unique individual qualities that you just have to find. You just have to find what they are. Like, I think what we've done in the last couple of years, it's really worked. To go back to your previous question, is we're designing pitchers. Like, we're designing guys holistically, and the way that we're doing it is we're trying to figure out what's different about them. And we work from the ball backwards in that. So we look through their ball flight and we just go, well, what's most different about this? What can we use to our advantage? Because if the theory is if it's different, a hitter's going to have a hard time preparing for it. Like, how can you prepare for a crazy arm slat, right? Or a crazy release side, or crazy extension, or a specific metric on a certain pitch, the way that it moves. Like, can we place him on the rubber in a certain way that forces that angle against a hitter in a way he's not used to? All those little things. We're picking out those little things, and then we're basically just feeding that design with as much force as
Talk
possible.
through that process. Like, a guy comes in, maybe it's like his first day, he's a freshman, you get him on the mocap, you have him throw a bullpen on the TrackMan. Are you literally looking through every single metric that the TrackMan spits out? Like, you're looking at fastball vert, okay, he's at 15, so pretty average, okay, cool, that's not crazy. Fastball horizontal, okay. Oh, cool, he gets like 20 inches of arm side, that's pretty outlier. Like, maybe this guy should be an east-west guy.
Right.
Are you literally looking through every metric and almost on like a percentile basis, like 50th percentile, 60th percentile, 90th percentile over here? That's interesting. Let's see if he can really spin a curveball really well. Like, what can we do with that? Like, how do you actually like approach the start of that
So
process?
the first thing we do is observe. They come in and like, we don't want to start messing with guys like right away. That's just like rule number one for me. It's like, we got to watch how he pitches. The game shows you what they're really good at, and hitters are like feedback. Like, I listen to a lot of different guys talk about their success, and Jerry Seinfeld's the guy that like has a sneaky master of his craft, that you wouldn't necessarily know until you heard him talk about how hard he's worked at it. And I heard him saying in a podcast one time that the audience is like a comedian's feedback. Like, whether they laugh or not is the only important thing. And I think that's so true with hitters. Like, whether they hit it or not and how they see the ball, like, that's your most important feedback. And especially when they do it consistently. So I really want to watch a guy pitch, and then I want to try and tie the data and the information based off of what he's doing really well, and then pin that about his delivery or about his arsenal or about just who he is as a pitcher, his identity as a whole.
Which do you prioritize? Like, do you prioritize what's actually happening on the field, what the hitters are telling and how they're reacting to the pitch, or do you prioritize like what the data says, what the model says? Because that's a tug of war in a lot of organizations. Like, the Yankees might say, well, this is our model, and like, you have to pitch this way because our model says this pitch should grade this way.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, the hitters are telling me that my 13-inch vert fastball is unhittable, but you're telling me it's bad. Like, they're telling me it's good. How do you prioritize like which one to believe?
Yeah, it's always the ball first, man. It's always what the ball is doing first. Like, we work from results backwards. on everything. And then the rest of that stuff helps you paint a picture of that story or polish whatever's happening. But there's a reason that they're missing bats consistently.
You can argue the numbers should, as the models improve, that should encapsulate all of this, but the models may not encapsulate horizontal approach angle, or like some of these outlier things that maybe aren't fully encapsulated yet that we don't understand.
Yeah, we want our information to support like what we see and what we believe to be correct, in addition to like figuring out how do we polish our philosophies, like what we might be missing, like those kinds of things. So we're trying to use our data to support what we're doing. But it did start out with, so I had an interesting path to get to this point, I guess, because I was Division III, but I didn't play pro ball. I played Division III baseball, and then I played Division II baseball, and then I started coaching Division III baseball. And then when COVID hit, I started training athletes at a place similar to this, but at a small place called Hainer Sports Barn in upstate New York. And I didn't have any tech like at all. I didn't have like any data at all. I just had video and would hook up the wire from my phone to TV and just like show guys how they're moving and take thousands of videos of plyo throws and whatnot, and just try to figure out the delivery. And through that, like I found things that work just based on like doing guys by hand, right? And like comparing guys to each other and comparing guys to big leaguers. And I found what works versus what doesn't work, but from a very non-linguistic way, I guess, from a very like trial and error based approach. So when I came to Wake, like getting all of this data helped me understand why those things work that way so much better, and then measure the in between the cracks of those little things to either polish or figure out whatever it is that we need to do to make guys better. And so one of those things like was ball flight. Like all of a sudden I had this ocean of like ball flight information that I've never had access to, and we have a data team. So the first thing I wanted to do, and I remember having this conversation with Chris like within the first couple of weeks that I started working there, was like we have to build a housing structure that tells us in context what's good, what's bad, what's indifferent. And so we literally just started, I was like, I don't know where to start. So let's just take every TrackMan metric that TrackMan spits out and percentile it to see who's high, low, in the middle. Exactly the same way.
See exactly how they grade out and all these things.
Yeah, and so we did that for the entire country of NCAA baseball. And we just tried to figure out in context, okay, what is different about this guy? What might we be able to use to our advantage? And we found a ton of things that were valuable that we wouldn't have known were valuable unless we did that. So we let them pitch and kind of use that structure and approach now to just tell us, like, okay, what are these guys really good at? Or what could they be really good at if we made XYZ change, and then try to make that change?
I think you mentioned there, like, I think it's super important to realize, like, there's a huge trial and error component here. It's not like the best coaches don't just have it all figured out, where it's like, no, this is just a formulaic thing. It's like, here's your data, this is guaranteed the solution, just do this and you're going to be like an all-star. It's like, it's very much not that way at all. It's like, it's a trial and error process. It's the data gives you some additional information, but to your point, you still have to have this, like, or at least good coaches have a mental model of like how they conceptualize the delivery. They've seen thousands of deliveries. They understand the individual differences. Like, they might be able to spot like 9 out of 10 of these issues like with their eyes alone, but the data now gives them this additional like superpower on top of that.
100%.
But it's not just like, look at the data that tells me everything. It's also having this mental model. It's having the experience. It's having been in the trenches, worked with a bunch of players. It's having done it yourself, like having had your own career, having struggled through things. Like, these all matter a lot. And even with all that information, it's like, well, we have a theory or hypothesis. Let's try it. Let's see what happens.
I think my whole career has been built on trial and error at this point in certain ways. But you get smarter at trial and error as you go on. Like, you figure out what works that way.
The bandwidth, the error is less. It's more trial, less error.
Well, instead of shooting blindly, like, you have a direction with where you're shooting in a lot of the time, and that gets more and more refined as you get better at it. But it's always feedback. Like, trial and error, you always get feedback. And to touch on the mental game for a second, because it's about pitching, like we're finding that guys have a weird emotional relationship with failure, where they think failure is like a real thing. And I always try to tell them, like, guys, failure is not real. It's your perspective on failure, right? Because failure, when you don't do what you expected or what you desired to or whatever, but you attempt to do that, especially against hitters, like, you're getting feedback from those hitters. So if you remove the emotional part from how your outing went, and how you feel as a pitcher, like, based on how your outing went, and just look at the feedback of, okay, well, what worked, what didn't work, why didn't this work, here's all the information, and look at it as if you're watching a different pitcher, especially if you can figure out that process, how to do that early on. Like, just go like, what's getting guys out? What's not getting guys out? What can I do to polish that process? Look, and you do that through every part of your craft. You're going to have a much more efficient path to where you want to be, in my opinion.
And there's a lot more information now too to know why you may or may not be having success, versus just like, I had a bad outing, I don't really know what I did. Oh, you left that ball over the plate. You left that ball up. It's like, well, maybe not. Maybe like the BABIP is just particularly like high on this small sample size. Maybe my FIP is like predicting something much different than what my ERA is showing.
Right.
Like we can now have a clear idea of like why you're having success or not having success.
Yeah.
As opposed to certainly when we were pitching in college 10 years ago, it was like, we don't really know what happened. Like, just that's how it goes some days. Like, which, I mean, sure, like that still happens. Like, you still make a good pitch and guy hits a home run.
It would have been helpful to have at least even just a little bit of the data then compared to.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember just not having an answer to some things and just being like, there's got to be something going on. And to speak on the just like being able to use the feedback from the hitters and see what worked, why didn't something work. I think that changes throughout your career, like based on what level you're at. So
For sure.
yeah, maybe you throw really hard with a average moving fastball in high school, and just the velo component beats everyone, and you get to college, and then all of a sudden, hey, the velo by itself isn't beating everybody anymore. Let's take a look at kind of like what was working before, why was it working before, and why is it not working now, and kind of just being able to kind of get into pro ball, rookie ball versus low A, double A, triple A, big leagues. They're all going to be different. You're facing better hitters. I mean, you assume you're facing better hitters each level you go up. So you have to kind of, hey, just because this worked then doesn't mean it automatically works now. Let's look at kind of what's working now and why is it or is it not working. So
it's one of the biggest differences I see in like college versus pro ball right now, especially at each level, is the college hitters, like, they don't adjust super well. Like, the really good ones adjust well, and you might have a couple of big league hitters in each lineup that you face. I mean, maybe 4 or 5, like in the really like the better teams that you're facing.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's like one swing, one philosophy, one capability of adjusting, right? And college hitters also don't have the time to adjust. Like, you're going to face our guys once, and if you're in the bullpen, maybe twice. And then you go to the big leagues, and it's like you might face that guy 2 weeks from now. And then, but they're also like, they're so quick at adjusting so early on, like even in the same outing, like by at bat 2 or 3, they might have a feel for like what you're going to throw them and how to change their swing to match the angle of that pitch or whatever. So you have to be way more versatile in your approach and what kind of weapons you have versus like someone in high school. I see that a lot. Like, the kids come in from high school and their velocity has been their strength to that point in their life, so that's their identity, is I throw harder than everyone around me and that makes me better. And then they get to college, especially when they get to pro ball, but when they get to college, it's like, no, you have to have a craft. You can't just throw the ball over the plate as hard as possible.
You also talk about like you're building pitchers, like you're engineering like this ultimate like version of yourself. So I think that's a helpful frame of reference to like zoom out sometimes. Like there can be this emotional connection to a given bullpen, a given outing. Like, I had a crappy bullpen, like my life sucks. But I have a bad outing, my life sucks. I'm not gonna play next weekend. It's like that's like the very myopic, like short-term view of your career. But if you can zoom out and get guys to see the 2 to 4 year version of what they're doing, it's like, what are we building to? Okay, you want to play professional baseball. What would you need to do to be okay? I would need three plus pitches or 3 above average pitches. Okay, where are you now? I'm like 1.5. Okay, like this is all just a process to get to that point. Yeah. Just reframing what failure looks like, reframing it to that bird's eye view, and it doesn't become this hugely like emotional process.
It's hugely important. It's really beneficial to them, because then they just start becoming masters of their own craft rather than trying to sort through their own emotions. Like, that just gets in the way, in my opinion. Although it's normal, it's a normal part of the process, and they're just kids. Like, I think we forget that sometimes. It's like they're 18 to 21-year-old kids. They're figuring out who they are as people. And that's our job as coaches, is to help them become the best version of that as possible.
Giving those guys something, I can speak, like, I know this would definitely apply to me in college, like giving a guy who has a bad outing or a bad bullpen, like a reason or something that they're targeting, like, makes it a lot easier to, all right, let's get back and start get back to work, basically, versus, it wasn't a great pen, like, I don't know, like, we'll figure it out next time. It just kind of leaves you in a tough mental spot. Actually having numbers or some data that could, all right, we need to work on this, or hey, this is the goal. Like, it just helps you. It just kind of helps the cycle of actually maybe failing a little bit, but it not actually being failure. More so, just like, all right, time to get back to work. So
if we did that as coaches, like if you were a coach working in a facility and you worked with one kid and it didn't go super well, and you took that personally as like, I must be a bad coach. Like, I don't think most coaches think that way. Like, most guys would be like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, what do I need to do that's going to work? Like, how do I fix like the process for myself, right? It's mostly never a thought of like insecurity. I think it's more just, how do I like tweak this and work on what I'm doing? But that's what players should do. Players should do the exact same thing. But with coaches, we don't tie our emotions to our performance. When that is our performance, is like, how are we helping this guy get better and just become a better baseball player overall?
I'm personally curious, and I'm sure a lot of other people are curious about like some specific case studies of pitchers you worked with. Maybe like, could you talk us through like Rhett Lauder's transformation? Because he's a name that, you know, would continually come up as like, you know, wasn't like the highly touted guy, became the highly touted, I think 7th overall pick. Talk through his process. If you were obviously there, first row seat for it. So what were some of the keys for him? How did you guys engineer that? What were some of the ups and downs for him to become that first round pick?
Yeah, Rhett is a very different case. Rhett was very much his own man in a lot of this. Like, a lot of these guys needed our help to show them the information, but Rhett was very, very, very confident in who he was and who he was as a pitcher. And I think that security enabled who he became, because he didn't have a lot of that emotion like in the way to help him master his craft. He just had the confidence to know that he was going to go dominate, and used what we put in place to help him as best as possible. So he was actually his own engine in a lot of different ways, which is interesting. There was a little movement stuff, like we changed the way that he landed at one point. We found that the angle of his feet and his hips were naturally out, and he had very large arches. So one of the things that actually clicked with him was we put what's the insoles in your shoes. Yeah, so like they would fill the arch in his feet, and that changed everything. Like, he could feel the ground a lot better, and that ended up being a really good change for him. But besides that, there wasn't a ton of movement stuff related. It was more, this is what you do really well on your ball flight. You need to use this against hitters, and then finding holes in hitter swings that he was going to face. And he's diligent with how he studies lineups and how he wants to dissect and attack hitters. And he worked extremely well with their pitching coach. They were super close with each other. So
I think there's something to be said for when a player knows what they do really well, they can latch onto something and have a lot more conviction in terms of what they're doing. I think immediately to Kyle Wright, who, you know, he really wasn't using, when he first came to us, he wasn't using his curveball as much as he should have been. And his curveball was like far and away his best pitch. And it's like, well, here is what you do really, really well. Throw your best shit more. And like, to their credit, like the Rays and other organizations, that's their philosophy. It's like, here's what you do really well, simplify it, do this more. Like, throw this pitch more, throw it in the zone more, attack hitters, just like throw your best stuff more. And then you have something that you can really latch onto with conviction and know why you're good. As opposed to like, I don't know why I had success that game and not much success that game. And the other piece of that too, which resonates with, I always try to differentiate like what makes like so-and-so like successful big leaguer better than like the college guy when they're both throwing 95 in here. They're both they both have nasty stuff. Like, why is this guy so much better? Obviously, you know, one's in the zone a little bit more, has a little bit more feel for his body, stuff like that. But you will start to notice like those top guys really own their information, they own their process. Like they take ownership of that. They're not sitting there waiting for somebody else to like tell them what to do, by and large. They're like forging their own path. They understand their numbers, they understand or if they're not a huge data guy, like they understand their delivery at an extremely high level. They have extremely good feel. They know how to make adjustments when something feels a little bit off. But they all have their own like process and ownership of that process. It's not just like sit back, wait for somebody else to tell me what to do.
Yeah, 100%. I think we merged the finding piece really well with the tweaking piece really well. So it's like I think we've gotten really good at making the necessary tweaks, whether in their movements or whether in their how their arsenal goes over the plate in whatever way, shape, or form. But we're doing that on an individual level, and that I think helps them build confidence too, because it's like they know that they're being designed in a way that they can only throw the baseball. right? Like, so they're going to be different from anybody else. They know that their own strengths. It just makes it a better way to get them convicted in what they're doing.
Something that we've talked about is like in creating some of the normative ranges, like in gathering data with our mocap. One of the things we're interested to do as we continue gathering more data is like create these very like refined like buckets to more precisely compare XYZ pitcher to, because I think a lot of these systems are like here's the pro reference range, and it's like, well, it's a pretty big range of like pelvic rotation, like what that looks like. Here's like high school, here's college, here's pro, here's like 90 plus, here's 95 plus. One of the things we're interested in doing is like, as we get a larger sample size, being able to compare like the 5'6" guy with a high arm slot who's coming in-house to like the reference range of here's the 200 guys we've had that fit that mold who like, and what do they look like, so you can more precisely compare their data to like peers or pros with similar metrics or similar anthropometry or similar XY, like arm slot. Have you guys thought through that? You obviously don't have, maybe that type of sample size either to do, and we don't yet either.
Yeah, we currently don't. It's just the guys that come in the lab. So we do think that way. I don't think we have the database to really do that yet. We do that on a smaller scale. Our harder throwers or the big leaguers that come through the lab or whatever, we definitely have a group of guys that do that. But yeah, like some interesting things that jump out to me is like the direction that guys rotate in, like from a specific rotational direction, right? Or a specific pitch type or a specific tunnel that they follow or whatever, and compare those guys to each other. I think that's a good idea.
What are some of the biggest like questions Corey, you want to answer as we gather more information? Like, what are some of these specific like correlations or what you really been thinking about?
I mean, open to everything. I mean, I think you don't want to just like hone in on what to look for too early before you actually have enough data to actually look at stuff. But I think generally just looking at how guys move and the guys that just throw harder, move better, or move in a certain way, like, is there something they're trying to do to get that result? I think the biggest thing is like how to actually enact effective change, like to a guy that is moving a certain way and you want him to move a certain way, another way. Like, I think a lot of times, just from my own experience throwing myself, trying to do a certain thing doesn't always make it happen. Like, you can try to do something completely, you can tell an athlete to do something that may sound like it should result in one movement, and then all of a sudden it results in a different movement. So like trying to do the exact thing that you're trying to make the exact change that you actually want to make sometimes doesn't actually result in the change you wanted, which is it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but maybe trying to do something completely different ends up getting you the change that you wanted in the first place. And it's just kind of a hard, I think the connection between finding out what generally the general principles that the hardest and the best moving throwers do, and then how to actually get someone to kind of transform into moving in a similar way. By no means in the same way, but I think there's general principles of kind of how someone moves that it lets them throw their hardest. And I think how to get someone that's not doing that to actually do that. Just telling them, hey, your sequence is off, or the velocity of this is off, or how your arm's moving right here is off. Like, do it like this. That's not automatically going to get you that change. Like, and many times it won't work. So. And
that's the bridge between the biomechanics team or person and like having the pitching coach who can take that information. Like, okay, their trunk's opening early. It was like, well, they probably first off can already see that. Like good pitching coach can see a lot of this stuff with their eyes, but some of it you can't. You do need the data. But to your point, like you need both pieces. I've always said like it's kind of like it's like a three-pronged approach. One is like just being able to identify the flaw in the first place, and like whether it's a flaw or not, like that's debatable. But like identify the flaws in their delivery, like lead leg, glove arm, torso, kinematic sequence. Like what are the flaws? Figure out like, okay, that's the first. That's pretty easy. Like it's still not easy, but that's the easiest part. The second hardest part, in my opinion, is figure out of all these things you found, lead leg, whatever. what are the underlying causes? What are the effects? Like, where's this stemming from? Is this stemming from like the first move, and that's leading to like the crappy like landing position, the crappy glove side, like getting on the side of the ball, like whatever the flaws are, and what are like the downstream effects? So then it's like organizing all these flaws in an order. Okay, cool. First move, that's the problem. Then it's fixing it, and this is like order of magnitude is more difficult to do each step. Like how do we actually fix it? And that's where it's like it's a very messy process. Yeah. It's trial and error. It's maybe we'll eventually get to the point where we just know like this flaw equals this cause equals this drill. Yeah. Go do it, and 4 weeks later you'll be fixed. I hope we get to that point where it's that formulaic, but we're certainly nowhere close to that point, and I don't think many other places are that we're aware of. So it's like that's a great point. It's significantly more difficult to actually make the change than purely just identify that change needs to be made.
So I think we've done a good job of systemizing that piece. It does seem like if you find a fix for a specific bucket of guys with a certain problem, that it works for a lot of those other guys. So I find that really interesting. And one of the interesting things about baseball in general is like we play the same game, the same rules, the same weighted baseball from the same distance on the same planet with the same laws of physics. And we all have a very similar anatomy. Like we all have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a trunk that are trying to move through the same laws of physics to master energy. There's so many commonalities with that. And there's, in a lot of different ways, there's one way to move to produce what you want, right? But everyone moves in a very different articulation or expression of that way. And what we found is if you find those commonalities, especially in just trying to master like how guys use energy and use ground force and use rotational force, but express that in their own unique way, then it becomes a lot easier to systemize and to teach that way.
Well, to your point, there are a lot of commonalities. There are notable differences that are small but significant, like hip anatomy, pronation supination bias, quad, versus glute dom. Like there are some things that are notable. I think where it varies more is in terms of like the mental side and how they understand or conceptualize like a various cue. Like you could have 2 guys that both need to work on like keeping closed longer with their pelvis or whatever. And that's a very similar problem. Like, but you might have to approach that completely differently because of one cue of like stay sideways, like that cue might work perfectly for the first guy, and then the other guy, it's like the way he conceptualizes his delivery, the way he conceptualizes, interprets cues, like completely different. Yeah. So you're also dealing with like their minds are all very like different and varying, even though like the underlying problem might be similar between 2 guys. You're dealing with all sorts of like complexities and variables there too.
Yeah. I think we try to relate to the human component. Did you guys learn it? I always use this analogy. Did you guys learn to ride bikes when you were little kids? Yep. You remember the day you learned to ride a bike? I ask this to everyone, and I've never gotten.
I know where I was when I learned. Okay. Yep.
What did that process go like for both of you?
Rode the bike, fell over and over until
and then it's wobbly, but you stay up, and then you fall, and then it's wobbly,
and then what happens?
And then you never forget.
And you never have to relearn how to ride a bike. Like I've asked so many people that scenario, and I get the same answer every single time. And I think that's really interesting. Like, well, why does everyone learn to ride a bike more or less the exact same way and tell the same exact story to that without being prompted? And for me, that it shows clues into how we learn to move as human beings. Like it shows our motor neurology. And that I think learning to move in any sense, but especially with pitching, is a very similar process. And what makes it so difficult is when you're riding the bike, you're constrained to what the bike is forcing you to do. Right, so you're pedaling the pedal because your feet have to go there. You're sitting on the seat a certain way because that's where the seat is. Right, your handlebars are right here. Right, so your body's forced to move in a way and repeat consistent repetitions in a very similar manner until the brain just goes, "I can do this. Like, don't worry about it," and then it installs the wiring for it, and then you never have to do it again. But pitching, like you can just move down the mountain as freely as you want to. Like there's nothing constraining you to do that. Right, so however your body ends up moving the best way it figures out how to is the way that you repeat it, whether you're a little kid or whether you're a high schooler or whether you're working on something brand new. But that's the movement philosophy that we have for our guys and just have in general, is how can we basically constrain them or teach them the new feeling in a way that gets them the master of consistent repetition so that this thing just installs, this movement just installs, and they don't have to worry about it when they pitch.
I have a question on that. So this, I guess it's scenario happens sometimes college or pro pitchers, but they have it figured out for themselves. They're kind of locked into a certain, hey, they're throwing great, their body's moving great, they feel good. And then all of a sudden, over a certain period of time, whether they took downtime or the summer off or whatever happens, they come back or maybe nothing, like specifically, maybe there's no off time, but just over the general course of half a year or whatever, everything changes. And not everything changes, but there's noticeable changes in results and how the ball's coming out and how they're throwing. From your guys' perspective, like, how do you attack being able to kind of figure out, hey, what happened along the line there?
Yeah, there's so many variables. We're finding it out now. It's like, are they eating different? Are they lifting different? Are they sleeping different? Is there something going on outside of baseball? Or is it how they're moving or how they're thinking about where to throw? Like this, we could just go on for forever, these things. I find the easiest way to do it, especially if it's physical, is literally just compare 2 videos of when he was on versus when he was off and sync them up by time and just see what's different. And the most amazing thing has happened when we do this over and over again is guys remember how they moved and something intuitively inside them goes, oh yeah, that makes sense. I don't feel that anymore. And then they can just go and do it. It's pretty amazing.
The good athletes can, for sure.
Oh, they're
like,
really, yeah.
Like I could think through, because in my process, like I wasn't just that guy who always threw hard and like never thought about mechanics. Like I never threw hard and I had to like try a bunch of crap. So like I have like 1,000 patterns of my delivery in my brain, and like I could go back to my 15-year-old 73-mile-an-hour pattern. I remember what that felt like. I remember what my like slide step 85-mile-an-hour like high school senior mechanics felt like. I remember what my like college freshman like jumping off my back leg like 87-mile-an-hour mechanics felt like. And maybe I couldn't exactly perfectly replicate, but like I could tell you what that felt like. I could
feel that, right?
I could repeat that. And I could tell you like all the feels. So it's interesting that I would say it's certainly at the college level, like the Power 5 level and like pros, they do have that intuition, that proprioception, that like awareness, where you show them, like, this is what you're doing. Most can go take it from there. You tell them the issue, and a lot of them can take it from there and make the adjustment like very fast. But then like, this is one of the biggest differences between the elite guys and like the JV guys in high school. They like can't bridge the gap themselves. I view athleticism as like not just like guys who are super strong and like lean and like powerful, but it's like that. It's the body awareness. It's the ability to adjust quickly. It's like knowing what's going on.
It's like that level of like physical intelligence. Like maybe they're not book smart or whatever, but they know
like
how
body
the body
IQ
moves. Yeah.
Like Aaron Sanchez's body IQ is like off the charts. Like he's like Lance McCullers, like same. All these guys like can.
You find that with a lot of the higher end guys.
They're very aware of like something was off in this start.
Yeah.
I felt like I was getting around the ball. I felt like, and I'm like, yep. Well, look at your data, and like everything is cutting like 2 inches more. Like,
right.
Let's figure out why. But like they can usually, they'll tell you the answer in a lot of cases if you dig, and that's part of it too. Is like good coaches. They want to see the whole picture. This is any industry. If doctors they need to get the injury history. They need to get like how are you sleeping? How are you like? It's not just like look at the immediate symptom. It's like talk to your players. They'll point you to the answer in a lot of cases if you actually like just talk to them.
Yeah,
how are exams going? How's life going? Oh, you just had a breakup. Like you're stressed. Oh, you haven't been sleeping for 2 days. Maybe that's why your velo's down 2 miles an hour. Like, oh, you just had a 8-hour road trip and you like are super stressed, or you've been eating like Cheerios for the like. Yeah. Okay, like you can put the puzzle pieces together, because it's not always just like, oh, the TrackMan data tells me everything. It's like that's one small slice. What about the lifting metrics, power metrics, like sleep? Like, are you wearing a whoop strap to track your sleep? Like, there can be a slippery slope with like too much data and data overload, but so maybe it doesn't have to be like measuring your sleep, but like let's at least tell me about, are you sleeping? Like tell me how the whole picture fits together. I think that's what the good coaches do, and some of the coaches can get very myopic in terms of like, I'm just going to do my one thing because it's all, I only care about like data. It's like,
yeah. Well, I think that's where the housing it in a specific way comes into play, like how it's presented to them, how it makes sense to them, the story that it tells, and then the context that it gives. Like that's the power of data for me.
I know you had a couple questions for
I
me.
do, yes.
Do you want to kind of flip the script
100%.
and ask about Tread a little bit?
So scaling how many athletes do you have? How many total is it? remote
Closing
and
in on
in-house.
2,000.
So it's almost 2,000 athletes. Okay,
It's been 5,000 or 6,000 over the past 4 or 5 years. So like unique athletes that we've worked with.
okay. So one of the things that I find a lot of people on the higher ends of the industry asking are the same questions, which I find really interesting. And one thing that, as we get more information on how guys can be designed better and how they can move better, is like, how do we scale this information and make it about an individual while still mass producing this information as a whole? It seems like it'd be a really big issue for you. So how do you guys scale your knowledge and your workload onto so many different athletes and keep it individual at the same time?
I would say the biggest thing is you have to have systems in place. Like it's very easy, and you see this all the time. Like you'll have ex minor leaguer do their own remote training thing, and they can coach 20 guys, and like then there's like a cap. Like there's a limit where it just like stops. It's like 20 to 30 guys, and if you don't have systems, like if it's just like trying to manually do everything, handwrite every program, like manually problem solve every single thing, like no systems, you can't really scale that. You can provide a great service, you can provide a ton of expertise, like, but you're not going to be able to scale that to hundreds or thousands. You're going to scale that to like one person company with 20, 30 guys. So the question is, how do you create systems around each of these things, right? Performance is, there's a ton of pillars of performance. There's the performance nutrition side, there's the pitch data analytics, pitch design side, there's the strength and conditioning side, there's the biomechanics, throwing programming, workload side, workload monitoring. There's all these different pillars. So you need to understand, each pillar, and the program needs to account for all of those things. But then as far as how you scale it, you need like systems in place. So like nutrition, like we're not sitting there like giving like 10-hour nutrition lectures to each guy, but we have these things built on the back end. So like here's a lot of the resources. Here's like where you need to be, calories, macronutrients. Here's like, we've gone through your food log, here's some concerns, like, but you're not like recreating the wheel every single time. You have a lot of these systems already built on the back end. Like the pitch data, like we have a data analytics team that have built some of these models, like auto-generating a lot of these reports for the pros. Like when they come in and throw a bullpen, like these reports get auto-generated, put into their folder. Like it's the systems and processes that allow it to actually scale on the back end. But first thing is figuring out, how do you get players better? How do you address all the pillars? That takes a while. It might be years to just like figure that part out first, and then you can figure out, okay, how do we automate some of these pieces so that we can actually scale it beyond 30, 40 athletes. And my opinion, it's like 100, maybe 1,000 times harder to scale the problem than to just like, to scale it is more difficult than just like doing it one time. Like Elon Musk has talked about it with Tesla. It's like, well, we can like, building a prototype is like easy. Like we can give you a Cybertruck prototype, but like mass producing 2 million of them, it's like, that is 1,000 times harder of a problem to solve than doing one. So
yeah, without a doubt.
Do you have anything to add on that?
I think systems greatly important, and then the coach that's actually conveying the information to each individual athlete, like I think that part is immensely important too. Just like there being a relationship there, I think helps a lot with it not being so overly, like it's so systemized that the athlete kind of like, I'm not kind of fully bought into that, but having the right systems and then having the right people actually getting the information to the athletes.
Extremely important point. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's the other half of it, is the systems allow our coaches to spend 95% of their time actually managing the relationship, building the relationship, and like talking, communicating with their guys. So it's not like sitting there handwriting every single program from scratch or handwriting every single nutrition plan from scratch. It's like the systems are in place to make their lives easier. So it's not like 50% of their job doing the administrative program writing stuff and 50% like coaching their guys, talking to their guys. It's like, no, the majority of their time is actually building the relationships, talking to their guys, so that they can be very efficient in terms of like the day-to-day trivial like manual stuff. Like we want to make that stuff super efficient. They like click some buttons, like move some levers, move some dials, and like boom, adjustment to your program.
Yeah, and I mean I can speak to that. I can speak to that. Like as a former coach, like you want to have the most time to spend on the most unique parts, I think, and like the actual problem solving parts are the like being able to spend your time coaching on that part is just I mean it's more fulfilling for a coach probably, but it's also just the harder part, and you want it yeah, you want to have your time to spend there. So
Yeah, another piece of this too is like the remote model allows us to influence more athletes than if we just did like, franchising in-person locations. Like we just have a bunch of treads everywhere, and like each location trains 200 people. It's like we can get more out of coaches, and they can have more of an influence, work with more athletes with the remote model. Like a coach might be able to have 85 athletes that they influence remotely, whereas in person, like that number might be 40. Like they might cut that number in half, or it might be 25 in person. I mean, it might be a staff of 15 pitchers, 20 pitchers for most colleges. So we're able to scale their expertise better using the remote model, through the systems, through the processes, through the asynchronous nature. The guys on the West Coast go and do their training. Like whenever they need to do their training, they set up a call, we talk about it. But it's not like we have to be there physically, like walking them through every single rep. So that allows it to scale a little bit better.
So your coaches are interesting because this is awesome. Like it's the first time we talked about it before. It's the first time I've been here and gotten to see this place. So there's a lot going on, and it's a big open space. But there's a lot of people here, and there's a lot of coaches here, and they're all very, very knowledgeable about what they're doing. And something I've noticed about a lot of them, and you're included in this, is like they all throw hard. They all throw really hard. They're like, I was like 95, and you're telling me like he's like 98 down the mountain, max effort. Like, is that something you want? Is that by design, where your coaches can do the movements and like do the things that you want them to be teaching athletes, or you just like happen to be recruiting athletes?
I think it's important as a coach to have had struggled through your own career, have tried to have overcome, have problem solved through issues, because that's what you're supposedly going to be helping your athletes do, is problem solving their issues, helping them struggle through things. Like it's not just like this straight line up. Like being an athlete is like, it's just like failure after failure and plateaus, and then you have a breakthrough and it's amazing, and then you like have a failure or you get an injury, and like you have to have been through that crazy roller coaster ride on some level. Like some of our coaches didn't play professional, a lot of them did, but like a lot of them just played in college. Some were D3 players. Like that's okay. We want to know, like, did you have a history of developing yourself, struggling through things like injuries? Like, I mean, Corey dealt with the yips at one point. Like he overcame it. Like he like we want to know that, because we're going to have athletes that are going to struggle with some of these same things. And so it's not like everybody that just throws 98 gets hired at Tread. It's like we have guys who are All-Americans who like don't have any problem solving abilities. They always threw hard. They don't have any appreciation for what it actually takes to get there. They didn't really struggle, or the second they had any struggle, they just retired. Like we don't want that guy. That's not like what makes a good coach. It's the struggle through. It's the struggle and perseverance through something, and that now you can relate to actually helping somebody do it yourself. Like I struggled my way from 73 to 98 over 15 years through that process, like 5 surgeries, probably 100 injuries. Like there's a lot of tools now that I have to help people, like teaching yourself a new pitch, struggling to learn this slider or that changeup, and then figuring out why like that didn't quite work. And in many ways, like the reason our coaches all still throw, train, like they're all still very active. They're all pretty young, like they're all 24 to 35 years old. That's like the R&D, like that's the research and development ongoing for them as coaches. Like we set aside, like a lot of them are by 4 or 5 o'clock, like now they're out there training, they're throwing, they're tinkering with stuff, they're teaching themselves new pitches, they're like playing with like a seam shift sinker, they're in the weight room trying to like deadlift 600 pounds or like improve their body composition, or like that's their research and development time, because as they can figure it out through their own careers, through their own training, now they're going to be able to relate to their athletes that much more and problem solve it.
Yeah, I've thought through doing this so many times, but it's just like not that what I want to spend my time on is making myself like a better mover. You know what I mean?
It could just be like, hey, I'm going to teach myself a splitter. Boom, you teach yourself a splitter, and now you know how to problem solve that pitch with the next guy where that might be a good pitch to add to the
That's
arsenal.
the benefit I would imagine of doing it. And like it's, if you can feel like a movement or a pitch or whatever, it helps you teach it so much easier, I would imagine, right? I think it's genius. I love it. It's awesome.
And then you put, and like we were talking about earlier, like not everyone learns the same thing, the same way, but all of a sudden you put 15, 20 of those people that are kind of like all similar mindset there together. You start to have more and more ways that have been successful in actually helping guys.
Yeah.
So I think
there's a magic to getting everybody under one roof. Like it's why we don't have coaches that are just working like all over the country, like just doing their own little thing in isolation. It's like, no, you come to Charlotte, you work under one roof. There's an exponentiality. It's like 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 1 + 1 equals like 20, because there's the ideas, the creativity, everyone bouncing off each other. Like a coach in 1 year here goes from like not really knowing anything to like a lot of them are able to take on pros, like take on big league guys, like after a year, because they just absorb so much information so fast, like osmosis, like just they're ping ponging around off of all these other knowledgeable coaches, learning from each other, and it's like this hive mind where we all learn and grow together. And so we knew that, and we knew that we have to get everybody, like the best and the brightest, under one roof, and it'll just make them that much better, because they can feed off each other. And like it's not like Tread isn't just like me, right? Tread is like has grown because of the people we have here, and then the athletes like who have invested in us. And so I think you might already gonna ask about this in the next question, but like Tread success is the people we've brought in, and like the standards that we set to like there's a high bar to like come work at Tread. And so it's sure we're in charge of like deciding who is a fit to work here, but like we bring in good people. We set that high standard for excellence, and then we like just create an environment for them to thrive, and then they help everything grow from there. It's not just like me sitting here like pulling all the levers, like coaching every athlete. Like it's very much not that.
Yeah. Something I've always lived by is success leaves clues, right? I mean, like everyone who's successful at anything, I think you can learn from those people, and you guys have obviously built something from the ground up, so what, I guess leading from that question, like what are some of those things that you felt have worked for success? Like not just specific to your situation, but more on a broader scale, just like what has made you guys successful at this point?
I've written a couple things, but I think the first thing to piggyback on my last point is like it's about the people. We were not the first in this industry to try to scale player development. I feel like we've done a good job. We're just getting started. But we try to learn from like some of the things that are going well elsewhere, and then some of the things where we just kind of sit back and observe, like, okay, that's holding them back. That's a mistake. Let's try not to make some of these same mistakes. But I think one of them is not retaining or appreciating that it is about the people. It's not just about like the systems and the processes. And so like one of the core tenets of our philosophy, you've probably heard the quote, but if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, build a team. And so it's not this thing where it's like just myself and my partner, and like we're trying to bring people along for the ride. That means offering competitive salaries. That means beating what pro teams can pay. That means treating people well. That means having work-life balance. That means giving people ongoing education opportunities, CEU credits, like in services. Like it's all the things of like you need to treat people well, because those are the people that allow the business to actually grow and thrive, as opposed to like, we're just going to run this company on interns. We're just going to run this company on minimum wage, employees, and just revolving door of people, and we'll just keep on doing that. Like that's one way to do it. We feel like the people are so important that that's not the way to actually grow like something on a larger scale. And so it could just be about, a core group of people, and like not bringing a bunch of other people along for the ride. But we very much, any very large successful company, it creates a lot of successful people along with it. You can't, like Amazon, Tesla, like there's thousands of people that with any of these large companies that have also become extremely successful as a result of being brought along. It's not just like one person and then everyone else is just like revolving door, like this, discardable, like pawn. So anyway, that's one piece. I think the other piece, like reason we've had some degree of success, I think just results speak. Like if you get athletes better, like that has to be the focus. Like get athletes better. They'll tell their friends, they'll tell their teammates, like that. People want, like the athletes will go where they feel like they'll get taken care of and they'll get better. So that has to be the focus over like Instagram marketing, paid ads, like that stuff's all secondary to just get athletes better. Like our core value, like first core value is athlete first. So like we have to make sure the athletes are getting taken care of. And if you do that, like everything else really falls. It's the same as any company, like client first, customer first, like keep them at the center of it. And I feel like we do a pretty good job. Like there's always things we can do better, but that's been a core value. Trusting our people. So like giving our coaches autonomy. Like they all have slightly different philosophies. We're not like, hey, you have to coach in this exact like box of a philosophy. I know some organizations are like, all the coaches are like their hands are tied except for the coordinator, and like you do what I say, and like you can't do anything unless like I tell you it's okay. Or like here's a general framework, like we're gonna give you the extensive like education onboarding to like know that you have proficiency in these things, but like you have freedom to problem solve. They have autonomy to use their own, come up with their own drills, their own correctives, their own routines with their guys, and so we give them the autonomy and we trust them to go and create their own individual plans versus like top down. This is exactly how you have to coach within this like confined box. I'm sure if you had somebody that you were answering to where it's like, Mike, you can't add another pitch to this guy's arsenal unless I give you the green light. You can't do this. You can't do this. Like the trial and error process requires some like inherent flexibilities to be able to like navigate within. So I think that's a big piece too. Like giving guys some autonomy and trust.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I could talk forever on that, but like
You're gonna have to stop him probably.
I think you might have a couple more questions you wanted to ask.
No, that was my last one actually.
Awesome. I guess for my last thing would just be like to close it. Like, what do you think the average, high school, college player like listening to this can take away from, just in general, like Wake Forest success? Like, what would you say to the player listening to this who's trying to figure out like how do I get to the next level?
So it's about mastering your craft, and I think mastering your craft as a pitcher is about one thing, which is how do I get guys out consistently. We lose the competitive nature of ourselves when we're in a training environment all the time. And I've had the experience of being in the training environment and then taking what I learned from the training environment and applying it to the pitching environment. And the thing that guys miss out on is they're trying to build stuff, but stuff only plays if you compete with it. It's the most important thing. So if obviously you need to get better at things, right? So if you're someone who clearly needs to do that, then you need to do that. But remember the purpose. It's about using it against a hitter to get that guy out. It's got to be the thing that you work backwards from. And just enjoy doing that. Like just fall in love with the process of competing to get guys out, and then building your design, your arsenal, your habits, your routines, your life around like being the best version of that you can do to get that consistently. And I would say, secondly, like understanding that that's an ever-going process. Like you're never actually going to be done doing that. You're just going to constantly evolve against hitters. And you look at like the best guys ever, Clayton Kershaw, and like the guys who have done it for forever. I was looking at like Rich Hill's numbers. Like Rich Hill's done it for like 18 years. It's like, well, what does he do that makes him successful? And he doesn't pinpoint his identity in any specific thing. He just, other than getting guys out, like that's the one specific thing that those guys do, is they know what their job is and they do it really, really well. So I'd say that. On the physical front, something that jumps to mind, I'll tell a quick story. I had a kid when I was training guys back in upstate New York, and he was a really athletic kid. At 14 years old, he was incredibly unstable. He was like a baby giraffe. Like in anything I tried to get him to do, he just wasn't capable of doing. And I was learning a lot myself through this process. But he was a kid that, like, he had the confidence. He knew he was going to be really good. He's just like, he's too young and he's trying to figure it out. And what I kept telling him over and over again is like, hey, we're working on the sequence in which you move. Like if you want to play Division I baseball, you got to throw a certain velocity, which is just the truth, and in most cases. And obviously you want to get guys out with that, but there's certain requirements that you need to hit. And he was really battling that. Like, I just don't feel like I throw hard enough, and that needs to be my identity, is I need to throw harder. So my only goal with him is to sequence him. Like, let's line him up and line his dominoes up so that when we do try to knock them down harder, that energy transfers through efficiently, right? But in a lot of cases with young high school kids especially, they need to be a certain age and a certain physicality to produce enough force to see that. And they look at other kids like throwing a certain velocity, and they compare themselves to that and start to think, well, I'm not enough to do that. And the answer, quite honestly, is, yeah, you're not physically enough to do that yet. So be patient with that. It's going to come on its own time as long as you do the right things. But I don't want guys to intertwine their pitching identities with how they move or what their stuff is. Like, it's got to be, do I get this guy out all the time, and work backwards from that.
It's a great one to end on. Mike, appreciate your time. think there's a lot of gems in here for people to learn from.
No doubt. Can we plug the Bridge Seminar real quick?
Absolutely.
You all right
Tell us
with
what
that?
you got going on.
So, it's our third year doing it. So the Bridge Seminar is December 1st through the 3rd. And I think the main goal of it is how can we answer the questions that everyone seems to have. I just want this to be a thing that pushes the game forward. So we're just trying to get as many great baseball and pitching minds in one room to answer those questions as possible. So you can find that on our website, and we'd love to see anyone who wants to change the game for the better.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right.
Appreciate your time, Mike.
Thanks, guys, for having me on.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.